Welcome to the latest in the series of the Labure Exports From Home Export Days, which is a series of shape-shifting professional events, online events, obviously, in which we try to respond to the needs of our members, ideas coming from within our own team and the wider industry. Today's discussion is kicking off our Tailor-Made event, which is all to do with artist and label services, specifically in the UK. Just a reminder that while you're watching this, you can leave questions in the comments, and I can pick them up as we go or at the end. If they're particularly relevant or pertinent to the discussion we're having, I'll use them straight away. But firstly, I'd like to introduce our three panelists today. So hopefully we can bring them on screen. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing well today on what is, I think, the hottest day of the year in the UK. We're all in the UK and from our respective homes, as far as I can see. So before we go on with the discussion, perhaps I could just go around the three of you and ask you to introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about how you got to be in your current roles. Maybe I'll start with Kate.
Hello guys, I'm Kate Hendry from Absolute Label Services. This is my longest kind of job term I've had in my career. I've been working for Absolute for a decade now. Before that, I worked for a boutique management company, and before that, I started at Virgin Records America via a very prolonged internship period. And yeah, I've been doing label services, project management, campaign management, and distribution marketing for this long now. And I am senior label manager at the company. I'm one of 6 people on our label management team, and loving my job, loving life.
Good. Okay, Pat.
Hello, everybody. My name is Pat Carr. I've been in the music industry for years. I've had my career sort of been doubled up between running and Infectious Records, which is a UK indie label, which I did in the 90s. And then I set up a label management services company called Remote Control after I left there in 2000. There wasn't really such a thing as label services then, but there were some friends of mine who needed some help in the UK. One of which actually was Moran from F Communications, who wanted some help running FCOM in the UK. So I sort of created an entity to help him and others do that. I ran that Remote Control for about 8 years or so until Cordra and I set up Infectious again by mistake. Actually, it was only supposed to be for fun. So then we set up Infectious. We had great fun that time as well. We had the Alt J album, which of course did really well, Local Natives and whatever. That got sold to BMG. Then I got made SVP and ran the marketing department and set up their marketing department at BMG until about 2 or 3 years ago. I then went back to my one great love, which is label services, label management, helping independent labels, helping artists that want to self-release, just doing whatever, marketing, campaign management, whatever on a freelance basis. We work with a range of distributors, Absolute naturally included. We're a totally flexible service, basically run by an old bag.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Pat. And Gary, because obviously you've had experience of more than one label services company as well as Cartel.
Yeah, so hi there, I'm Gary from Cartel Music Group. I started out at Warner's actually, and I was in the catalogue department to begin with. There was a transition a few years ago where we found a lot of artists that were signed to catalogue deals or had legacy deals didn't really want to be putting their records out on the catalogue label of majors. So one of the early examples that I dealt with was Johnny Marr from the Smiths. We actually created Warner Music Artist Label Services for him. He benefited from various departments around the business. Although the record did come out technically on the catalogue label, it certainly didn't look like it. I went on to move fully into ADA from that point, where I looked after various independent labels, including the Because label and the Ed Banger catalogue. I then moved over from there to a couple of big independent labels, and I have now found myself back in the distribution world, which is a very exciting place right now.
Thank you. Now, we've called today Tailor-Made because we want to emphasise the sort of, I guess, the a la carte nature of the services that are provided by all three of you, in fact. But can we sort of venture a definition of what we mean by artist and label services, and how that might be different from either a label model or just a purely distribution model? I don't know who'd like to come in on that one. Kate.
So I think the thing that's super different between a label and a label services company is that I always say we are a label, as in we act like a label, as in we have most of the services in-house, or most departments that a major label would have in-house, but on a smaller scale, a more boutique business scale. And the main thing is that we don't own any rights. You know, our clients are labels, as labels, managers, artists on their own, even brands. You know, they retain the ownership of their rights, and we have a very basic distribution deal, which we take a percentage of sales and then we charge for services on top. So I would say that those two things for me are what separate our deal from a traditional label deal. I don't know if the other guys have anything else to say on that.
Would that be the same as a cartel deal then, Gary?
Yeah, I would like to think of us as a scalable, accountable partner. We're not the repertoire owner. We don't own the music, and we're technically not investing in that music. We may help cash flow things, but at the end of the day, the rights retain with the label partner. So we're here to assist and we're here to help. We're here to help you grow.
Okay, and Pat, would you concur with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a wide word that I think sometimes overused in the industry. You know, everybody provides their so-called label services right the way through, and some of which are bespoke and uber helpful. I think Absolute and Cartel are two of those, and some of them literally give you, once it's all signed and sealed, you get access to a portal. And I think that in terms of you're all label people, so it's less relevant, but in terms of some of the managers and the artists that I deal with, you know, they say, okay, so upload your metadata, and they're like, what? You know, so it's a word that can be overused in terms of how much service some of the label services companies give, and also just in terms of with labels, in terms of advice and moving them in, because it's all very well having access to the market, but what you're looking for, and again, you know, I take Absolute and Cartel out of this generalization. Quite often they give you access, but they don't tell you how to use it best, how to use the UK market best, which is a very bespoke market. So yeah, it's a much misused term, I think.
Is there a difference, you're saying, between, say, a distribution company which throws in a couple of extra services then and a full label services arrangement? Absolutely.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, I'm just going to say, like, when we first started in 1998, I mean, I always triple check this every time with Hendry when I do, my boss, when the head of the company, when I do these things, because
let's talk about it, because Absolute, I think we can safely say that Absolute is one of the first, certainly, label services.
According to our company history, we are the first ever label service company in the UK and we came up with the concept of, like, the idea of an artist going to a distribution company and saying, I need way more help than this, and I have no idea what else to do apart from physically get my CD into HMV. What else is there? And it started with that conversation, I think, between Hendry and Paul Carrick. Paul Carrick was, I think, technically the first artist ever to do a label services deal in the UK as well. And basically he was just like, well, I don't need this, but I do need this. And, you know, these are my strong points, and this is what I know about my artistry. This is what I know about what I do. And then it was for a team of 2 people to say, right, well, we've got a distribution, very, very, very good, solid distribution arm here. Back then, obviously, it was only for physical. And we also have amazing relationships in this pool of co-independent sector companies that handle all of these things that we need them to do. So rights administration, registration, manufacturing, PR, plugging, advertising, media buying, all of these things that, retail marketing, racking, marketing packs, posters in the windows, all of those things. The artist most likely will never really know the details in the ins and outs of those very standard formulaic things that we now do as part of a marketing campaign for an album or a single or an EP. So yeah, I believe that that's where it started, basically. Yeah.
I could vouch for that.
Okay, that's great. Well, I'll come to you in a second, Pat, because Gary, I guess the Cartel model is similar, very close to the Absolute model as well, as I say, with that sort of the distribution plus. I guess obviously we're saying that there's a certain point where it becomes genuine label services. How's the well, can you talk a bit about the evolution of Cartel?
So again, I think it comes down to that word of scalability. Cartel started as a management company. We still manage the original artist, actually. They're called Fat Freddy's Drop, who are now an arena level reggae band, 8-piece reggae band doing Alexandra Palace. Who saw that coming? Over the years, the role of management has evolved so significantly into the label area that clearly they were going to need support. So the rising of companies such as Cartel very much is off the back of an evolved management process, where actually the power has returned back to the artists, where they don't have to sign away their rights. They've got choices. So the flourishing label services sector is no surprise when you understand that. And various companies perform different functions. The reason that it's hard to define what label services is because every artist has different requirements. Some will excel in some areas, others will struggle with the business bit. Financing is often an issue. A great label services company, Absolute, of course, being one of those, Cartel, hot on their heels, I hope, is really understanding the nuances of the artist's business and getting under the skin, maybe telling them what they don't want to hear, but must. And as I say, helping their business grow. So it's ever evolving as well. It's not finished. It probably will never stop evolving as the business continues to change.
Great. Well, we'll come back to that evolution, I think. But Pat, I'm keen to also get this distinction between companies like Absolute and Cartel and then remote control, because it's a slightly different approach, and you haven't come from that distribution background necessarily.
No, I'm a label girl. Infectious. The first time round, we grew it. We merged with mushrooms, so we had Ash, we had Garbage, we had Muse, early days, and we had Peter Andre. But it was a big old. It started from sort of 3 people, merged with the Australian label, and became a big old thing. So, and then getting infectious subsequently in a very, very different world, but 8-9 years later, again, Star 2 People and Bottle of Wine, ending up with a Mercury Prize. It's so I'm a label girl. I know how to run labels. So, and I know how to put my music out. So, the services that these guys offer are, it's great and it's perfect. We're much more campaign management and hands-on. We're a bolt-on. I mean, when I started it with Arik Moran with FCOM, the idea was that he was going to hire somebody in London, but he couldn't, it wasn't actually financially, the right time, or there wasn't quite enough work to have somebody doing a full-time job being FCOM London, but it still needed doing. There still needed someone to liaise with the distributor on the label's behalf. And PS were a very helpful distributor, and there was obviously a very, very close relationship there. and then that grew with other people. So I see ourselves with labels as a sort of a bolt-on London office with London, with UK expertise. And the other thing that we offer is we work internationally, which I know Cartel do too. But we can put a global campaign together across everything. So, and again, we deal with managers, and we work with the live sector quite well, and helping advise on that. So it's a much more it's a much more bespoke and more hands-on. We don't have a large amount of clients. We can't. If people can't get hold of me, I mean, I've got a marketing director that I work closely with, and other people that are bolt-ons for my company. But it's much more bespoke and much smaller and more intense, I think, is the way to do it. It can be anything, now when I set it up the second time, there is no, we can't do that. If we love the music and we love the people, we'll do something, and we do different things for all of our clients at the moment. So it's different. And as I said, I've put stuff through Absolute, and we've worked very closely together on projects. Not for a while, actually, Kate. Let's do it again.
There you go. Well, hopefully this can be a spur to that. So you've all spoken about the amount that if an artist, or actually even a label, have to do by themselves, and the amount they have to do has increased. I mean, is that is the biggest increase in sort of in terms of we can use it to throw it out there, which is in some contexts means one thing, but I think for our purposes means sort of digital service platforms rather than demand side platforms. Has that been the biggest increase in sort of the amount of labour and also the technology required to develop a career? Who wants to? Yeah, well, Pat, then.
I think yes and no. I think that it's made it a lot easier for people to access marketplaces. When it was just physical, you couldn't get your CDs in the shops if you didn't have a full-on proper distributor. And so I think now with the DSPs, there's all the ways, there's TuneCore and DistroKid and all those other ways of doing it. You can have your music available globally, which I think is a massive difference. And I think it's exciting. But I'll let the others take it now. But I mean, I do think that's a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Gary, any thoughts on that? And obviously, I feel like label services model has grown in tandem, with streaming services and the rest.
I think that it's incredibly difficult for a lot of artists to develop from the aggregators, but it's still absolutely possible to do it. And there's some mixed messages from the industry regarding how successful you can be. Maybe some of the hard work is not seen on these successful campaigns. And a lot of artists can be somewhat sold a dream that you can just upload your music and off you go. A lot of hard work is done on every successful campaign. And I think it's very easy to confuse the ability to upload one's music to Spotify in 24 hours with a success story. So, yeah, streaming services exploding has obviously changed the entire business, not just the services sector, but it shouldn't ever be at the detriment of other areas. Physical is still a huge business for us. It's not for everyone, but it's important to make sure that that's not your sole business.
Great. Yes, Kate.
I mean, yeah, that's a loaded question, David.
Great, good. My favourite kind.
But I think if you're going to be a company that progresses in this industry, especially in the independent sector, which is increasingly more technologically advanced, as is the entire business, I think you have to be positive about those new forces coming in and changing the landscape. I mean, it's a very exciting place to be right now, as Gary said earlier, from a distribution perspective, from a marketing perspective, especially in the last 3 months. The availability of artists and new music on DSPs, and certainly on social media, anything digital, makes our lives easier, in my opinion. It makes it so that the main way is that it's actually elongated the campaign lengths. So you have streaming campaigns lasting for 12 to 16 weeks sometimes for an EP, or even sometimes for a single. You have 5 or 6 singles coming out before an album even touches announcement on socials. It's really brilliant to have access to the output that artists are putting out there these days, and where they feel like they're needing to create every month and not just every 3 to 4 months. And they are prioritizing their creative output now, which I think is paramount to what we do, and it's what keeps us in business. So.
Okay, thanks. So I'd like to look a bit at the general range of services that all three of you offer now, and also how much is the degree to which it's in-house, or that you use outside so external providers, and in what areas. I know with Cartel, for example, PR could be you could just go to Cartel for PR without using any of the other services.
You said the PR, just the PR.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think the way that I often describe our business is one company with 2 sectors. Basically, we've got the distribution, sales, and marketing, and then we've got essentially an agency that can handle promotions, marketing, and other. So you can come to us like Absolute, I'm sure, for a range of services, or just one. It's flexible, and ultimately we're always looking to serve what the client needs, not what they think they need. So often they'll come to us with a request and they'll end up with something completely different that they hadn't necessarily thought of, which is always fun. Every project, it never ends up where you think it will go, in the best possible way.
Thank you. Pat, in terms of your services, again, it's obviously you're going to be working. You've got your own team, and also you're going to be working with people. Obviously with distributors like Absolute, as you said.
Yeah, it's remote control is me and one other who's a marketing guy who also does his own stuff. He's just nice, and he's just younger than I and cleverer, so it's a good addition. But everything's bolt on, because I think putting the team together is that's part of the thing. There's for me, putting the right press team with the right artist, the right price is part of what we do, for example. So no, we're totally bolt on.
Okay, and Kate, you were nodding, in terms of doing just PR as well as within Absolute.
Yeah, this kind of goes along with the bespoke side of everything. That is a very key term for what we do, and that's not an accident. I mean, we as product managers and label managers, I have to look at every project differently. I always say there isn't a deal that I do that is the same as the last deal. I mean, everyone comes to you with different needs, different expectations, which need to be managed properly, which is a day-to-day job that requires day-to-day service just on its own. But yeah, I mean, the only department that we don't have in-house is PR and promotions, because that is the side of a campaign that I would say needs to be the most bespoke, the most tailor-made, because, firstly, we're a company of 27. We wouldn't be able to afford a 3 or 4 person promotions team. And if we could, we'd only be able to afford one for press and one for radio, maybe. And we couldn't expect those 2 people to love a heavy metal record, to love an acoustic pop record, to then love, a dance record. I mean, there's many people in the independent sector that are brilliant in what they do in a promotions perspective, from a promotions perspective. And, it's like having the pick of the litter. When you choose a team, it's a very important part of it. And it's oftentimes what people come to us for expertise for, as with everyone else, and on this panel. So I think that area is something that can't really be kind of skimped on when you're kind of picking and choosing people for the right music, the right project. And that can take weeks sometimes, that can take a very short time, depending on what the label comes with. I mean, for example, using Pat's kind of model as an example, she basically does what I would do as a product manager, but she just manages all of it. So yeah, I would say that choosing the right PR team is a really integral part of it.
Okay, thanks very much. We've actually had a question which allows us, I think, to move on to something we wanted to talk about anyway. So it says, how advanced should be the music you receive? Are demos allowed, or do you need to have a fully produced piece of work? I'm going to expand that slightly, just to say, you know, in terms of are there minimum requirements for a project? What are you looking for with the projects that you're going to work with?
Okay, so David, just because we had this exact same conversation the other day when we were preparing.
We did, yes.
I'm going to just say what I said there because I feel like
that's fine. No one else heard that, so.
Important. It's, yes, a song is lovely. Some music is lovely, but it's about so much more than the music. I don't know how many times I can say this or get this out there. If you send me an email saying, I've just made this, what do I do? And then I go back immediately asking them, well, can you please link me to all of your socials? Can you tell me about what you've been doing live-wise on your own? Can you please tell me about if you've got any management? Can you tell me, I mean, unfortunately, and maybe not unfortunately for me, but maybe for artists who look at it this way, there is a level of development there that I kind of expect to be able to work in partnership with someone. And not to be brutal, but, you know, if you don't know certain things about social media marketing, a mailing list, a website, how to promote yourself on the internet, basically, it's really difficult to work with someone that's coming to me in that state. You know, there's a certain amount of just 360 an artist has to be. It's not just about the one thing that they're doing, the shows or the music. It's about everything else. It's about their tone. It's about their identity, who they want to be, what they see themselves as being in 5 years, what gigs they see themselves playing. I mean, you have to really have all of this already developed in your brain before you're even coming to someone like me. Now, this is where I think the traditional label model works better, because if there is an artist that has no idea about anything, but they're brilliant, then I think they'd be better served by a label deal that is funding them for the first 2 years of their development career. And that makes more sense, you know, and that's why that whole side of the business still works. And we're all happily in this business together, because there's all different solutions everywhere you look. And it's just really fortunate for the artists involved or the labels trying to get a deal that there are so many options, and we're just one of them. So yeah, there are different levels of that, the kind of state of people that bring music to me. And most of the time, if they're not there yet, I say, this is what you need to do, and they do. And I've had probably 40% of them always come back to me 2 years later and say, hello, I'm here again. So that's really good. You can always book your own gigs, start building your own fan base, you know, be proactive. Yeah, but yeah, a good song is a good place to start, that's for sure. But I do look for other things.
Is it safe to say that's why, I mean, people sometimes associate the label services model, particularly with already established artists who have this kind of awareness. But I guess it's as, you know, you can have new artists, upcoming artists who also are very savvy.
Different levels of artists I work with, for sure. I work with development artists, definitely mid, upper, profile, all that kind of stuff. But the development space for me needs to be an understanding of certain things, certain core things, shall I say.
Gary, you're nodding away to that, so I guess you agree generally. I don't know if you've got anything to add in terms of what Cartel are looking for with an artist or a label indeed that they want to work with.
Yeah, so we actually brand ourselves as artist services as opposed to label services, although we do have clients on both sides of that. Kate's right here, that there's a whole heap of development which artists and managers really have to do on their end. It's their voice, it's their story. I think we've addressed this recently, because clearly there's so many amazing artists springing up, especially during the global lockdown, that have got great music, but none of the infrastructure to support their career. So we've attempted to address that by, we're categorically not an aggregator, and we don't really offer that service at all. However, we ventured somewhat into it in order to try and help some of these clients that we like, but actually the service that goes around that is kind of straight distribution plus attempting to place them with the manager, attempting to connect them with some agents. It's by no means a solution to a successful career, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. And yeah, in terms of what we're looking for clients, we are looking for artists that are on the road already. Finished music is better for us than demos. I think, getting a sense of what the record will sound like is obviously wonderful, but we deal with finished products. We're not in the A&R space like that. We're never going to tell our artists what to look or sound like. The strongest clients for us are ones who know where they're going and need assistance to get there.
Great. Pat, I'm going to bring you in, and also with the question, there's also another question from Adriana Coupel, but I'll come back to that. But we've got one saying, when is too soon? When is the right time for French bands to start thinking about the UK? And I want to bring you in especially because obviously you had experience of working with French acts. As you said, it was FCOM and others as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard one. I mean, I think it's always good to demonstrate a level of success on your home turf. I think that, particularly with, the UK media are funny about overseas artists. And, I think we've got to be frank about that, so you need to be able to sort of show some sort the same way that you're playing gigs in France, or if it's appropriate or what you're doing, you have a certain level in France. However, it's totally, there are artists that have done very, very well in the UK without. Tahiti 80 did well in the UK before they did well in France on Atmospherique. Now, it was before I got involved, I'm afraid. But, it's a very hard one to do because everything's different. There isn't a precise answer. But if I was to generalize, I'd say sort your home turf out first, but always keep an eye out for the international markets. And the timings of releases are very, very, they're different now. French radio works very, very differently to the way that UK radio does. So, but you do need to demonstrate some sort of success in your home, success in a small way, or some sort of fan base in your home turf. Really, it needs to be looked at.
What about if your whole strategy is sort of facing is outside France to begin with? You decided we've got a sound that we think is going to work better in the UK or the US or somewhere else.
The same still kind of applies. Just because you think that doesn't necessarily mean that it will translate.
Yeah, that's true.
Sorry, be blunt. But always think about international markets. Always keep half an eye on it, but you can't do everything at the same time. And if you want to forget France and just come move to London, then do the same things that any London band or artist would do. Do gigs, meet people, find yourself an agent, and do all that. It's the same thing applies. Just move to London and do it.
Okay. Well, currently that would involve at least 2 weeks of quarantine, but hopefully at some point that will be feasible. Let's just keep on that for a bit. Certainly in terms of who. So I mean, Pat, obviously you have worked with non-UK labels. What about Kate? Let's see, Kate first. Your experience of working with non-UK labels or artists. Are you approached a lot by non-UK labels?
Yeah, I would say maybe 20%, 30% of my labels are US based, and maybe that's because I'm the one American label manager who speaks the language. But yeah, no, I do work with labels based overseas. I can't say specifically French ones. I have met with many French labels at conferences and the like, and panels like this, and but I would say that on a very general kind of advice giving from that place, kind of echoing what Pat said, this particular market, if you want to be serious about being in the UK market, it is important to be in territory. It's important to play gigs here, and it's important to do exactly whatever any other artist that is trying to come up in this territory do. I mean, for me, and I was thinking about this after our chat the other day as well, that, you know, I don't really treat anyone, I wouldn't treat UK clients differently than I treat overseas clients, European clients, US clients. Everyone's the same. We're all trying to do the same kind of thing. We're all trying to take a piece of music and market it and publicize it in the best way that you possibly can. And, you know, if it is another language other than English, you know, I would say in the last 5 years in particular, the music industry has gotten more multilingual on a mainstream level. And I think it would probably be easier to market music that is not English speaking. I mean, I can't say that I haven't had an English album of like whatever the original language album or a version of it come out as part of my plan, what I'm doing. You know, I've worked with Scandi artists who haven't had English versions of their album, that we've done English versions of their album. Same with a couple of small French releases. But, you know, it's different now. I mean, that was 3 years ago. It's very different now. And I think going back to the streaming conversation, you know, so much is accessible from a global perspective. Like if you're in one culture, you can experience another culture just through the music or through the viral charts from this country. Or, you know, if you really want to get into Latin music, it's right there. So I think the availability of non-English language releases is helps people's understanding of it. And people don't mind if they don't understand what they're listening to. It's music, it's really good music at the end of the day, and they'll go see it live and they'll listen to it through their computer or their phone.
Right, thanks. And Gary, what about what would you say is the percentage of non-UK labels or acts that you work with at Cartel?
It's quite high. I wouldn't go as far as 50%, but it could be 40. We have offices in New Zealand, and we have an office in Amsterdam. In both of those territories, both of those markets, we actually have, a lot of hip hop. In New Zealand, we've got the biggest hip hop acts who we actually now co-manage. Going back to that involvement of management, we've somehow got involved there. We have a fair amount of non-British clients, and actually they are both of those areas have grown thanks to our presence in those territories. Simple as that. We weren't necessarily looking to develop those artists in the UK. It was very much about providing a local service where we had resource. But clearly, as we are evolving as a business, we are now looking at importing those acts and taking the successes that we've helped build locally and, you know, selling them here. So one of the New Zealand acts that we work with, who are now themselves probably at 5,000 ticket level, who are dominating New Zealand radio, we've actually taken up the mantle here, and it's working, certainly with One Extra, for example. So yeah, we're starting to see international acts come through our system. I'd say it's working quite well, and that number, that 40%, will no doubt grow. As we look to expand into more territories, that will absolutely be a thing.
Am I right in thinking, did I imagine that you're opening an office in the States, or you have one as well? Yeah,
we have an office in Los Angeles, yeah.
In Los Angeles as well, okay. Thanks. I want to ask also for, if we've got people from French labels watching, aside, I guess, from the obvious advantage of working with a label on all their releases, of convenience, are there other advantages or other things that the label services can bring to a long-term relationship with a label? I don't know who'd like to take that first. Maybe for Kate.
So, sorry, what do you mean by that?
So, as opposed to working with just an individual act, if you decide you're going to, a label is going to work purely with you for the UK, for example, are there other advantages other than the convenience of always working with the same person that can come from that relationship of developing maybe a label's identity, or the identity around a group of acts, a group of signings rather than just one?
I mean, yeah, it just kind of increases our chances of getting another level of the story out there, right? So we're always looking for layers of story, always. So if we have one artist, then we have one story. If we have a label, we have a whole story. So I work with a kind of really important independent rock label, and they have a very standard identity that they've had for years. And the challenge of it is really to find a way to kind of pitch it in a new way to our retail partners, for instance. So it's really maybe going back into talking to the label heads about the identity of the label and coming up with new ways to pitch that and bring it into the modern era, into where we are now, and incorporating what they might be doing online and awards that they might have won over time, and key releases that they've had over however many years they've been in business. That's always a great thing to have, for specifically when it comes to retail and pitching a label to retail. And if they have catalog, or if they have more than 5 or 10 artists on roster, it's always worth having a creation story for the label. That definitely helps when it comes to, I don't know if that answered your question, but
no, that's absolutely, yeah. I don't know for Pat as well, because yes, please. I don't know if we can. Pat, absolutely. I don't know if we can unmute you, or if you can unmute yourself. Okay, are you able to unmute, Pat?
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'm back again. I'm having issues, people. The one thing I was just going to add to what Kate said is that just in terms of labels, I mean, a label identity can be really useful in specific niches as well, because it puts you into a family. So for example, when I was at BMG, they were expanding the recording section really, really quickly, and they were serial purchasers. But we worked with things like Ram Records, the drum and bass label, that was, you would never, being on Ram was a whole thing. You were on Ram or Hospital if you were serious in drum and bass, and that was important. We worked with Rise Records, which was, I mean, people bought stuff because it was on Rise. I mean, Rise used their own YouTube channel to put, instead of artist channels, and immediately you'd get 50, 60,000 views within the first few hours because it was on the Rise YouTube channel. So, in some genres, I think the label identity, the family of being in part of a label, it can be key. In other ways, there's multi-genre stuff. So there's different ways of doing it. But I think in specific genre stuff, then it's good to be on a label.
Yeah, Gary, I feel like Cartel's built some very strong relationships with certain labels as well. So yeah, perhaps it'd be great to have your thoughts as well on these label relationships.
Yeah, I think over the years, an analogy that's often used is about restaurants and distribution services and services companies being like restaurants, and the service isn't great, you wouldn't return, etc. That's an outdated concept for me. We're now in a position where we may well still be in a restaurant, but the customers bring in their own ingredients and asking you to cook a meal out of it. So really, the benefits that you'd be gaining by working with a company like us or with Absolute is about trust, accountability, a reliable partner actually that can handle whatever it is you bring to them. And realistically, no one can handle everything. So it's about trust. It's about being able to say, actually, we might not be the right partner for this, but here's who you should work with. I think trust is the biggest thing. And actually, when you're working with an aggregator, if you're a smaller act, you don't necessarily have a person you can talk to. So having direct contact with human beings, that's another huge benefit.
Thanks. Now, so we've got about a quarter of an hour left. So I'd like to just look at sort of the future, actually, and then take another couple of questions, because we have another couple more. One issue, I guess, is maybe this is going to be loaded as well, but thinking about the majors, obviously have their own offering of label services, and they're able to make acquisitions, increase their market share, and so on, and that that will affect their relationship with streaming platforms and so on. So, generally, how do you see this sector developing? Is there room for all these services? It doesn't seem, there seems less, compared to say the live sector, a thing of perhaps independent companies being squeezed or all being acquired. But it'd be interesting to have your takes on that. Maybe I can go back to Kate.
I think that as we go on, and if we develop as we're supposed to, meaning that we're positive about all the advances happening around us in the digital space, certainly it seems like every week these days, with an update to a platform or something new that they're providing or whatever, it is hard to keep up with. But I think that it's just going back to what I said before, and sorry if this sounds simplistic, but I do think that we are some of the more progressively minded companies in the independent sector. I do think that I think that creative support is going to be a big thing moving forward. It's really just started, I mean, like with Gary's artist services versus label services kind of nomenclature there. I mean, for us, it gets increasingly more about supporting the creative output that's coming. So you have the core assets, which is the music and the visuals. And then you need, because of this digital arena and because of the overload of information we're fed all the time, and we constantly need to edit this creativity that's coming out. We constantly need to figure out rollout plans for video upon video upon video. And, you know, everything requires moving image these days to promote anything online. And, you know, it's becoming so much more about making many, many, many supplemental things out of the core thing that is there that we receive from the artist. So I think for me, that's going to just keep multiplying and multiplying. And we're going to have to constantly now be editing the output of information. And I think that is very much controlled by us marketeers and us helping the artist figure out exactly what they need to be putting out there and how much is actually required of them on a creative level to do that. And I think that as a result, our artists, DIY artists, independent artists, will be the hardest working and most creative artists out there. I'm not going to say, I'm not like pitting us against like major label artists in any way. There's so much creativity going on in the entire business. But I think from the idea of, we're not just relying on the artist to create everything anymore. We're relying on an entire team of people to think creatively about the creation that's come from the artist. And that's because it's just because of all the digital advances, really. And the digital advances have now also helped us as being big fans of physical product. You know, it's taken us back to the market, how we market the physical products. And we can do that online now through adverts and through creative kind of visuals for those, and we could use our D2C platforms to do that with as well. So I think that whole idea of just getting to be more creative and being more successful, making that the success of the project, I think that's gonna be what evolves us over time, if that makes sense. Sorry if it's a bit jumbled.
Yeah, that's great. Gary, can I bring you in on that as well? Of the, you know,
yeah, I think
future development.
Well, look, I think we are over this now, but there was a period where to be independent and to declare yourself as independent was almost perhaps seen as admitting defeat or lower sales. And I'd argue to the hills that has changed. That's just wrong. You know, independent is now the place to be. Once upon a time, a major label was the place where you would want to sign because you knew that would guarantee success. Well, actually, there's no guarantees of success in that world anymore. More and more artists are achieving brilliant and amazing things in the independent sector, and long may that be the way it is. There's some amazing creative companies out there to support some amazingly creative artists. And also, shout out to the managers. They get forgotten in this conversation. A lot of hard work being done. So yeah, I think for the majors, they've got a lot of companies on their tail right now, and that's only going to get worse for them. Good. If they could keep developing artists to about the 500,000 monthly listeners level on Spotify and then dropping them, that'd be amazing. Thank you.
Pat, is that your feeling too?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's room for everybody, you know, and I think that, you know, it's a global industry. You know, we can't uninvent the majors. They're there and they do have the muscle. I mean, the one thing, though, that's always made me gratified, and that's throughout the 25, 30 years I've been working, is that we've all seen major companies throw money at bands and it hasn't necessarily worked. I mean, you know, the great public will, you know, the great will out, you know what I mean? And if it's not, you know, there's a very crude phrase that I won't use, but it involves polishing. But, you know,
I think I know it, yeah.
But, you know, you can't, so that's there, but you know, there's different ways of doing things, and I think the independent sector it's stronger because it can be nimble, you know, and it's stronger because it can react, and it can turn on a sixpence. You know, we can go have an idea in the morning and start executing it in the afternoon without having to go through 5 meetings with 15 people in over the space of 3 weeks. So I think that's always been a strength. You know, we just launched a bank called the Murder Capital last year, and you know, we had success across all of Europe. You know, now it's been curtailed horribly, which is, you know, just due to what's gone on. You know, we had big old tours planned in March and whatever, but you know, we got as much media attention in, I mean, look at the, you know, France, but the same in Germany, in the Netherlands, you know, everywhere, Poland. Now, you know, we wouldn't have got that if we'd done that through a major. There's no way they would know how to do that. The same with Alt J then back in the day, different times, but a different example. You know, there is no way that Alt J would have made its way through a major system. So yeah, Gary's completely right. The creativity of the independent sector is always going to be its strength because it can be different. It can't be stuff that can't be pigeonholed. And I salute that. I celebrate it.
Thank you. We've got a shout out to Gary from Savoir Faire in the comments, but let's take a few questions that people have posed during this for the last sort of 8 minutes or so. So we got Adrien, with easier access to a more global distribution provided by the streaming channel, artists certify their music doesn't have the same chance to settle in their public library because there's something new every day. Any thoughts on that? I guess it's a difficulty of standing out on streaming services.
I mean, I will say that, you know, there's always been high volume of music out there, whatever stage of the last 20 years we've been in. I mean, yes, the digital landscape has made it so that there is a lot to choose from, but it's also very well organized on the platforms for you there. And, you know, algorithmically speaking, it's one of the most advanced ways to take advantage of a platform. All you need to do is interact on the platform and use it, focus on one, use it, and it will serve you music most likely that you might like, and that might lead you to something that you might like. You need to be open to these things. That's from a user punter perspective, but maybe from an artist perspective, how do I get discovered in and amongst all this stuff? I mean, I would say don't focus on being discovered in a pool of other music. Focus on cultivating and building a fan base in ways that are simple at the start and maybe then get more layered as you go along. I mean, start with that one song, start with that pack shot or album, you know, whatever cover art you're talking about. Open your social media accounts and get some content up there, but it will take you 3 to 4 to 5 years to build a fan base, no matter what era we're talking about. Again, you know, these are all very standard concepts of being successful as an artist. And how do you measure success? Do you measure success by the amount of streams do you have, or the amount of gigs you do, or the amount of people you have on your mailing list? It can be very different for any level, any type of artist or act. I would really, when you kind of get overwhelmed by everything surrounding you, you need to kind of hone in on something that's going to yield some sort of result. And, you know, it could just be DMing people on Facebook saying, this is my new song, please follow me. That works. That literally works. Just do that for 6 months for your first single release and see what happens at the end of it. I mean, start on one thing and then keep building and focus on the group of people that you've managed to build that want to hear what you have to say.
Thanks. Actually, you mentioned live, and we've got a question here from AD93. Do any of you sign deals where you're taking a cut of live shows, more like a management deal, or are the deals you're generally signing related to specific catalogue or releases you're working? Who'd like to take that one? Gary.
I wanted to actually give an extra bit onto Kate's last.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay. Just that if the question is, I've got some streams happening and I'm worried about it dropping off, I would say it's so important to make sure that you've got everything connected. Is your Spotify profile filled out? Are your socials connected? Are you making it easier for the consumer that may have to stumble across your music to invest further in you as an artist? So make sure you've got all your boxes filled out. Right, on the on the life right now, we don't engage in that. We clearly, it is in our benefit. It benefits us hugely if an artist's live career is taking off or is successful. So although we will always attempt to help in that area, we don't take a cut of it.
Okay, and is that the same for Okay, and one more I think which I'll give to Pat. When developing French projects in the UK, do you recommend prioritizing a license with a local label, a distribution deal with a distributor plus a PR agency on the side, or label service deal? So I guess it's how do you choose? How do you decide? So I'll give that to Pat.
Thanks. No, there's a load of questions there. I think you weigh up all options, and I think they are all potentially ways of making it work. You know, the one thing you have to remember is you've got to think local and global. So, you know, you've got to keep your eye on the global system for streams and stuff and everything else. You know, you release, you need a global release strategy. So, and sometimes if you do deals just with a label just for one territory, they want to release when they want to release, and you know it doesn't matter about what's happening anywhere else. So you've got to have a big mind on it. But that can really work if it's that with said, if you get that right, then that could work. A distribution deal with a distributor you'll need help with. You'll need that PR on the side and whatever. I mean, again, you know, in some systems, if you've got other things going for you, that could work. And a label service deal, again, you know, it depends what your needs are. And I think they're all viable alternatives. And it's about, as in anything, just making sure that you pick what works, and also who's giving you the plan that gives you faith, that makes you think, okay, I see it, I see the idea. Who's going to work with you? So there isn't an answer to that. That's the skill. That's the skill in working out what the best approach is.
For the other two, any suggestions about choosing the best model for you?
Hello. Yes, I think as I've said earlier, every deal is different. There are nuances to every artist campaign. I hate the phrase "a hit is a hit" and the assumption that something will work in one territory will work in another. There's a huge disservice being played there to the cultural differences that affect consumers' consumption habits. So I think you really need to weigh up what it is you're looking for, play to your own strengths, and look to fill the areas where you're not so strong with a great support infrastructure around you. There's options out there in every sector now. Okay,
so it's almost like look to your strengths, but also look to your weaknesses and decide who can help you with those.
Absolutely, the best clients are the ones that have weighed that up properly. That it is the weaknesses where you need support, not where you're doing well.
Yeah, that's great. And Kate, maybe final words on that?
Yeah, I'm just adding on to what everyone already said. I think the main point here is that you can't just go into a situation asking loads of questions. You need to have done your own research first. You need to have established your own artist identity first. Going back to what we were saying earlier, there's a level of expected level of being informed. You know, there's no reason not to be informed right now. You know, if you're in a place where you've made a body of work and you're even just self-managing, you have no excuse for like saying, I didn't know about percentages, I didn't know about service costs, I didn't know about any of these things, because really you have access to the internet. You can look at all of these things at the very least. And it is about being smart and taking that's that independent spirit coming through. The independent spirit is about seizing all of the information that you can get, being self-sufficient and getting in there with the knowledge that you already have, but also accept that you're never going to know everything, hence why you need to talk to people like us. And then there is the perfect marriage, really.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thanks. I think that's a good place to finish anyway. I'd just like to say thank you again to our brilliant, experienced panelists, Kate Hendry from Absolute, Gary Lancaster from Cartel, and Pat Carr from Remote Control Agency. That's the end of the panel for today. Obviously, the From Home export days are carrying on. The next one is going to be on the 3rd of July, and it's a user guide for festivals post COVID-19. So that's obviously going to be an interesting one and quite an important one at the moment. So thank you again, and hopefully see you all soon.